It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Phil. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Bill. This is a show about all things University of Louisville, where we talk about research, students, guest speakers, programming, stuff going on the UofL campus. So hope you'll stick around for the next 30 minutes or so and check it out. On the show today, UofL has some outstanding students who are McConnell Scholars, and a couple of them are really good debaters. They're among the top Moot Court teams in the country. We'll talk with them. And if you cherish your dog and are curious where your dog's lineage lies, you'll want to hear my interview with a dog lover and researcher who was on campus for a speech a few weeks ago. But first, it's a relationship that puts computers in classrooms and more computer power behind the search for cancer cures. It's a win-win for UofL and the kids of Kentucky. The company that's the linchpin of this collaboration is called Dataseam, and its CEO is Brian Gupton. He's here along with John Trent, professor of medicine, and Wendell Cherry, endowed chair in cancer translational research at UofL. So welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Good
to be here.
You're the CEO, right, Brian? And that's your title?
Today.
Today?
Yes.
Last you knew when
yes.
you walked in the studio?
Yes.
Okay. And John Trent has been with UofL for how long now, John?
17 years.
17 years. Yeah, I knew it.
Actually, I got a promotion. I'm the deputy director now.
Oh, you did?
Of the Cancer Center.
Okay. So you're a chief cheese, almost a chief cheese?
I do a lot of admin.
You do a lot of bureaucratic stuff?
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Well, we'd prefer you spend a lot of your time researching all this cancer.
So would I.
Okay. I know how that works. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Dataseam. Brian, why don't you give kind of the synopsis of what Dataseam is for people who have no clue what it is?
Sure, and thank you. So Dataseam is an organization that started as a 10-page paper back in 2003, where we looked at an opportunity to place new computer workstations in the rural parts of eastern and western Kentucky to provide computers to students that wouldn't have them otherwise. Those computers allow them to expand educational opportunities in those school districts. And then even at nights, weekends, holidays, and even when the teachers and students are on those computers, they are providing powerful horsepower for the James Graham Brown Cancer Center to do structure-based drug design, develop new chemotherapy treatments cost-effectively and at a fraction of the time and expense.
So the way this was always described to me is it's like this huge computer network. You take all these computers that you're putting in the school systems, and John Trent over here is using them to do research, right? Is that how that works? Isn't that UofL's role in this whole thing?
Sure, yeah.
So how does that work, John?
So it's a resource that we use, and it doesn't have to be at UofL, but basically for our drug discovery, what we do is we take the structure of a target for cancer, and then we have huge libraries of molecules, 25 million molecules we can buy and test as an anti-cancer agent, but we use the computers to screen first, so it cuts down the expense. You only test 100 instead of thousands, so it's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot faster too, so you can do it in a matter of days. And what we do is we farm out little jobs to all of these computers over the state, over the Dataseam network, and each computer does its work, and then it comes back and gives us the information we need to go and say, yes, we want to test this one against cancer. So in essence, it was a cloud before a cloud.
Right, cloud-based. So it was the idea being that you've got all these computers. How many, Brian, are there computers out in classrooms now? You got 25,000.
Excuse me. There's been a little under 24,000 placed since 2005. We've got a little over 9,000 in schools right now.
Okay.
So, and they all sit on a common network throughout the K-12 system,
right?
Statewide.
Mostly in eastern and western Kentucky.
Correct.
But in Jefferson County now too.
Well,
right? Or getting there.
No, getting there. So yes, mostly in eastern and western Kentucky, and the rural component of this and the funding component, which has made this happen over the last 10 plus years, has been coal severance dollars. So coal severance taxes, which are generated on the mining that's gone on in Kentucky, has funded this as an economic development and diversification program in these school systems to provide opportunities for kids in the sciences and STEM. And that's the one thing we didn't bring up, is that the give back as a part of this program is that not only the University of Louisville, but also Morehead State University, who's our education partner in Eastern Kentucky, they provide 4-year scholarships to these kids to go into STEM and STEM education, which is a very important part of workforce development for the Commonwealth.
So it's a multifaceted thing here. You've got computers in the classroom for kids. You've got scholarships for more kids from Morehead and UofL, right? and they're called Dataseam Scholars.
That's right.
Right, and then you've got John over here taking the computer power from all these computers, these 9,000 computers out in classrooms around the state, and using them to help target cancer drugs, right?
Yeah,
Or
and it
cancer.
works. Using this approach, we've had a drug get to the clinic, so it does work.
So this isn't just pie in the sky stuff.
No, it's one of the major resources we have at the Cancer Center for Drug Discovery, and our goal is to get new drugs into patients. It's not just cure mice.
So, and it may be a few years, obviously,
Maybe,
before that happens, but you're getting there.
Yeah.
You're getting
It's
there.
a
Are you
long
optimistic?
process.
Are you optimistic at some point that this
I
thing?
have to be optimistic. I work in cancer.
I gotcha. And Brian, what's the total amount of dollars that have been plugged into this, plugged into Dataseam and this network and cancer research over the years?
Sure. So the
And where are you now?
Okay, fair. The Kentucky General Assembly has invested originally as an economic development grant, and then also they came in after that with a legislative appropriation. So almost a little over $25 million has been invested from the Commonwealth. That $25 million has allowed the Cancer Center, I'll let John talk about the competitiveness for federal grants that the grid allows them to do. But that investment has been made, and we're getting 100% usage out of that investment for the Commonwealth. Right now, we're kind of like everybody else. If anybody follows what's going on in Frankfurt, they're putting together a budget for the next 2 years, and we are a part of those discussions to continue to do what we've been doing since 2005, and also expand the program. Because while we like working with the folks in the coal-producing counties, there's also opportunity to address other rural school districts out in the state to provide them technology. We also have school districts that are no longer producing coal, so we want to keep them in the program as well. And then ultimately the win for the University of Louisville is that they're out recruiting these kids and these bright students to come and pursue STEM careers at the University of Louisville, STEM education.
So, John, what would you tell Joe legislator or Josephine legislator in Frankfurt if you got the shot to say, you're considering all these different budget items, and where does Dataseam and this money for this project fit in terms of cancer research at the University of Louisville and finding a cure for cancer?
The first thing I would say is this is a great opportunity to spend the same dollar 3 times, because it's used in many different ways. Now, for us as cancer research at the university, it's a critical resource that makes us unique in the country. And when you're competing and only 9% of grants are being funded federally, you need an edge. And this gives us that edge. And it has been responsible for, or as a supporting resource, for over $41 million of federal funding. So it does work. We're unique. If we lose it, we're not unique. We're just another school.
Right.
And we use it to generate preliminary data that we need to put in new grants. So the way the NIH works is, most federal grants work, you need data for feasibility first. You can't just say, I've got a great idea. So we use the grid to generate that data. So it provides the data for us to get the actual research money later. So it's an essential resource for us.
Brian, last chance, make the pitch.
Fund it.
Well, that was pretty easy. Okay. Back to you in the studio.
What's wrong with kids' cancer and computers?
Yeah, it's a good program. And so I hope you guys are successful in Frankfurt. And John, I hope you're successful. You've been at the university for 17 years. And so keep up the good fight against cancer. And we'll hope and pray for both of you.
Great.
All right?
Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Brian Gupton and John Trent. Brian from Dataseam and John Trent from the James Graham Brown Cancer Center. Macey Mays and Robert Gassman are both seniors at the University of Louisville. They're both McConnell Scholars at UofL, and they are members of a Moot Court team that's done very well in some national competitions, and they're here to talk about that as well as their time at the University of Louisville. So welcome to both of you. Good to see you again, Macey. Robert, I haven't met you.
Nice to see you.
Welcome. All right, tell me a little bit about being McConnell Scholars. What does it mean to be a McConnell Scholar for 4 years at the University of Louisville?
I mean, it's almost impossible to sum it all up. I know people always say that when they're seniors, that it's hard to sum up the past 4 years. But I think being a McConnell Scholar, if anything, it's a lot of growth, both personally, professionally, as a student, as a person. Like the amount of growth that they facilitate and the opportunities that they give you, they're they're beyond anything I've ever experienced throughout my life, really.
So you've grown a lot. And Robert, you got your education paid for, so that was pretty good, wasn't it?
That's a nice touch, right?
Nice touch. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Louisville,
Okay.
and Macey's from Muhlenberg County in western Kentucky.
Yeah, I knew where Macey was from. I know she was a country girl. So,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So being a McConnell Scholar, what's it meant to you?
Well, I think the biggest thing is it's developed me into a better leader, a better communicator. The McConnell Scholarship, we have 3 tiers that we focus on. It's leadership, scholarship, and service. And I feel that the McConnell Center has given me adequate opportunities to develop my leadership skills and to become more of a servant leader, where I see myself as not always taking charge, but being an active participant in anything that I'm trying to undertake.
All right. Before we wrap this up, I'm going to ask you what's the one thing you're going to remember about the University of Louisville. So think about that for the next 8 minutes, okay?
Okay.
All right. So you were on a Moot Court team.
Yes, sir.
What is Moot Court? For people
want
who
me to
don't
take
know
it?
what that is, what is
Okay,
it?
Yeah,
well,
Robert
it's the
did-
American Moot Court Association. This is an undergraduate branch. So Moot Court is a mock Supreme Court oral advocacy, where each year we get it's a mock case, but it could be a real constitutional issue. So this year we dealt with the Fifth Amendment in self-incrimination and the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishment, where we use real Supreme Court cases to make legal arguments in front of, at the regionals and the nationals, we do circuit level, and district court judges will usually be our judges or
Wow.
lawyers.
Okay. So Macey, do you take the defense or the prosecution? Well, it's not prosecution. It'd be the defendant or the
Yeah.
plaintiff role.
Yeah,
How's
so,
that work?
So at the appellate level, you would take respondent or petitioner, and you would also take Fifth or Eighth Amendment. So whenever we would argue the petitioner side, we'd be arguing for our client. I argued for the Fifth Amendment, and then Robert did the Eighth. And then whenever you do respondent, you're arguing for it's called the state of Olympus, which is like the U.S. government. And again, I took the Fifth and he took the Eighth.
So you were a 2-person team,
Yes, sir.
and your first competition was where?
It was in Saginaw Valley State in Michigan, and that's the regional competition. There's 8 regional competitions. It's 8 regional competitions throughout the country. University of Louisville takes part in the Great Lakes.
Okay. And you finished where out of how many teams?
Top 4.
We finished top 4. I believe there was 37 teams at the Great Lakes Regional this go round.
Okay.
So we did top 4.
So you did the Fifth Amendment and the Eighth Amendment. So what'd you argue? What was your gut argument on this stuff that you think got you in the top 4?
So we surprisingly did a lot better with the respondent argument for the state, which is surprising because most people prefer the petitioner argument because it's a lot more like in your feels, and you can really you've got the judges on your side a little bit with petitioner because they want to fight for the underdog, and petitioner is much more of an underdog argument. But there's something about the respondent. It was very logical.
And now this was the Fifth and the Eighth Amendment again.
Both,
what
yeah,
we're talking
yeah.
about here. So again,
Yes, sir.
self-incrimination, and what was the other
Yeah.
one?
Cruel and unusual
I
punishment.
don't know my amendments by heart.
No, that's all right. No, that's
just
all right.
to set it up really quickly, you've got the U.S. government that are now using it's called an FBME. It's the Functional Brain Mapping Exam, and it's used to catch criminals. And so the way it's going to work is they'll put electrodes on the head, and they'll show images to the person that they're questioning, and if the electrodes respond to brain activity, then they know that you've been in a certain crime scene or you've seen a certain
super duper lie
person.
detector test.
Yes,
It is.
yes,
And so-
precisely.
And so our client was condemned by this test and has to serve 30 years in solitary confinement. So I'm arguing about the test, and then Robert was arguing about if that 30 years in solitary confinement was an appropriate punishment.
But you were arguing on the side of the government, right? That it
We
was.
were.
You have to be-
The
you have
test
to be
was
ready for
okay,
either.
and you should have
Yeah,
been.
you've
At
gotta
the
be
flip of
ready
the
for
coin,
both.
you have to be ready to argue either side.
Oh,
So that's what's
wow.
really
so you
exciting
don't know
about
going
it.
in what you're going to have to
No,
argue. You have
they'll
to be
just
briefed
tell
on
you.
both sides of
Yes.
the case before you walk in the room. Wow.
So we've got to be ready to say that, this was absolutely, this is ridiculous. We can't believe that the government would do this. And then the next round, you're like, the government's just trying to protect its people.
Precisely.
So
You have to
it's
flip your argument
So
just
really,
like
you're
that, huh?
you're learning how to be a politician. You're ready for it.
That's awesome. Talking with Macey Mays and Robert Gassman, McConnell Scholars at the University of Louisville. You mentioned Fulbright Scholars. You've both applied to be Fulbright Scholars. Where is that process now? Where are you?
Okay, well, both of us are semifinalists, which means that we have advanced. They are going to send our applications to our host countries. I've applied for Taiwan, and Macey has applied for Thailand. So within the next about 90 days, we should be hearing if we were accepted by the country, and we both would fly out around September. should we be selected.
So maybe our futures will get a little bit more solid in the next
Well, a little bit more solid for
That'd be
it's a
great.
year, right? A Fulbright
Yes, sir.
scholarship is
Yeah.
for a year, so
Yeah.
you'd be overseas for a year. And what would you be doing if you?
We both applied for ETA positions, so English teaching assistants. That's going to vary in what you're actually doing, whether or not you're going to be the only one in the classroom, or if you're actually assisting an English teacher. You could have anywhere from like 15 students to 45 students in your classroom. So, and you can be placed really anywhere within your country as well. So we could be in a really rural area. We could be in a really urban area. So it just depends on where they want us, if they want us. Yeah.
And the Fulbright Scholarship is a very prestigious international scholarship, and the University of Louisville's won 110 of them since 2003. So you're in good hands with Pat Condon and the crew that are
Absolutely.
preparing you for
Absolutely,
the
yes, sir.
Fulbright Awards. So good luck overseas. Well, good luck winning, first of all. I hope you both get one.
Thank
and
you.
Good luck overseas when you go. So I told you before we left that I was going to ask you, what's the singular thing at the University of Louisville? Was there a moment? Was there an event? Was there something that happened to you, either as a McConnell Scholar or just a UofL student, that you're going to look back 10 years from now and say, that was really cool, or that changed my life? Have you got that moment yet?
Well,
You think?
I would think it's more of it's kind of a little bit more conceptual for me. I think the biggest thing that I took away from U of L was a sense of community. U of L, it's almost this odd dichotomy, where in one sense we're a very large state school, we're a research institution in an urban area, but we have world-class opportunities to hear from different leaders, to have great professors, to undertake research. But at the same time, the community at the University of Louisville feels like a really, really small place. So I feel like I was able to be very grounded in my experience at U of L and have a strong network and community around me that supported me. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm going to take away from it, was that I got to, at the same time, be at a big school that also gave me the interpersonal connections of a small school.
It's a big, small school.
It is, yeah,
Kind of like
precisely.
Louisville. We say it's a big, small
It's
city.
a big, small city,
Yeah.
precisely.
And Macey?
And I think that, I mean, I'm going to just echo Robert, and really what you just said kind of leads into my point. I come from Muhlenberg County, Central City, and there's about 5,000 people there. We just recently lost a stoplight because we didn't need it because the traffic there wasn't traffic downtown. So I mean, that's a leap, you know, especially when you're 18, and like I had traveled, but coming to Louisville is coming to the big city. Like, this is a big deal. So whenever I came to Louisville my freshman year, I was scared out of my wits. I mean, looking at how big everything is and how many people are here and how much stuff you get to do. And I think I'm just most overwhelmed by like how accepted I was into the Louisville community and how easy it was for this place to be home. And for this place really to always be home, no matter where I go.
Sounds like we need to get some video sound bites from you two about that. We're trying to do an orientation video from the freshmen that are coming in.
Yeah.
So sounds like we need to get you two on tape just talking about the experience
Bring us
you've had at
back
the University
in.
of Louisville. All right, very good. We're here with Adam Boyko, who is a scientist at Cornell University, and he's visiting the University of Louisville and the University of Louisville Biology Department. He's a guest of Arts and Sciences at U of L, and he's an expert on dogs and the genetics of dogs and doggy DNA and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
Isn't that what you do?
Yeah, so I'm at the vet school there. I run a canine genomics lab. And
Canine genomics lab. I
That's
never
right.
thought we'd hear those words together. So
we-
what is that?
So we study genetics, everything from pet dogs that are brought into the hospital with certain inherited disorders, and we're trying to figure out the genetic basis of those, to just figuring out the origins of dogs, the history of dogs. We travel the world collecting dogs and analyzing their DNA to see what it can tell us.
This sounds just so wild that I read a little bit about your company and also what you do at Cornell, and I just said, really, we've taken dogs that far, huh? I mean, we've really. So what have you found? What's the most interesting thing when you talk to folks and you say, I look at the genetics of dogs? What's the most interesting thing that you've found so far that you just said, wow, that's really cool?
So I thought it was really neat when we were, one of the first mapping projects that we did, we were looking at size and shape of dogs, and we took all these different measurements of dogs, and then we did genetic analysis of like 1,000 dogs. And we could go through with programs that were being developed to find regions of the genome that had undergone strong selection. And so our expectation was these regions would be for size and shape. And we took all these measurements, and sure enough, when we looked at the genomes to figure out where positive selection was the strongest, we found a region that didn't show up in any of our measurements.
Which was?
It turns out, and we had to do a Google image search to figure out what was going on, It's the gene for prick ears versus floppy ears.
Prick ears versus floppy ears,
That's
really?
the strongest signature of selection that we found in the genome.
And going back how far? How far are
So
we
to
talking
the
about?
breed formation. So the mutation itself was probably shortly after domestication, so thousands of years old.
Okay.
Probably over 10,000 years old, because we see both prick-eared and floppy-eared dogs in all different kinds of regions in the world. But that's one phenotype that's very important to breed standards, and it can go different ways in different breeds. And so as you are establishing a certain standard for a breed, then it would become fixed one way or another, and so that's why you get the signature.
So you can tell me what about my dog? If my dog has floppy ears, what can you tell me about my dog and the background and the history of my dog?
I mean, from the DNA, we can tell you, does your dog have floppy ears or prick ears, about how big is your dog going to be, so we can predict body size with about 80-90% accuracy. We'll know whether your dog is long-furred, short-furred, straight-furred, curly-furred. Does it have eyebrows and mustaches or not? Is it likely to be heavy shedding or not?
Don't even have to look at the dog.
Don't have to,
Don't have to see a picture of the dog.
no,
you can tell
just
me
need to
that
see
off-
the DNA.
Just got to have a little blood sample. Or
And then-
how do you? Oh, that's another thing. How do you get a DNA sample from a dog? Is it a blood sample, or do you swab the inside of their cheek like you do on the DNA test for humans?
Yeah, so in my research lab, we typically get blood samples because it gives a very large volume of DNA, and we can do a bunch of different kinds of analyses for that. But if you just want to know the genetic profile of the dog, a cheek swab is enough. And so the company that I have, which is a spinoff of my research at Cornell, it's actually in the life sciences startup incubator at Cornell. We just ship out a cheek swab, you swab your dog at home, ship it back in, and then in 4 to 6 weeks, you've got your whole dog's genetic profile. You can download the ACTs and Gs. You can look at whether your dog's related to other dogs, how inbred is your dog, what's the mitochondrial lineage, and what's the Y chromosome lineage for your dog. It's sort of like as much as
Do we know when they married? Do we know when they who married who the grandma is?
Yeah, so I think some people are using the DNA profiles now to kind of like matchmake their dogs with other dogs. So
It sounds like Ancestry.com for dogs. Is what it sounds like.
yeah, it's quite a bit like that.
Okay. All right. We're talking with Adam Boyko, who's from Cornell University. He's in the veterinary sciences at Cornell. You said initially that you were looking to figure out the diseases and those kinds of things, that's really the science that you're trying to figure out. So what have you been able to try and figure out and try and pinpoint in terms of diseases that have affected dogs throughout the ages? Or can you get that far?
So we're working on it. So we have more diseases that we know the mutations for in dogs than pretty much any other non-human animal. And almost all of these diseases are what we call Mendelian diseases, where a single genetic variant has a really outsized impact on whether or not you're going to get it. So we can say, oh, you have this disease variant, so you are at a very high risk of blindness or whatever the disease is. Of course, a lot of diseases that we're interested in dogs are things like cancer and hip dysplasia, where there's not a single genetic variant that is going to make it so you definitely get the disease.
Like mange?
Yeah, so I mean, and that's got a huge environmental component too, right?
Right.
So I mean, of course there is a genetic component. I mean, some breeds get allergies or get cancer at much higher rates than other breeds do, and it's not environmental. There's actually genes in there, but figuring out what those genes are, because it's a much more complicated genetic system, lots of genes are involved. It takes really big sample sizes, and in fact, to the point where it's probably beyond what you can fund with even an NIH study. Certainly what you'd be able to fund with a Canine Health Foundation grant. So that's sort of the impetus behind doing commercialized DNA testing and using a research grade array to do that rather than doing one-off testing. Is now, because owners are investing in their dog's genetics, and 95% of the owners are interested in contributing these genetic profiles to scientific research.
Right.
You have this opportunity to build up a database of tens of thousands and hopefully ultimately more dogs with genetic information and with health and environmental information. And I think that's going to be the key for unraveling a lot of these disorders that we've really been interested in but have only scratched the surface on so far.
And you say you've gone all over the world to, do you go take dog samples, from dogs around the world and bring it back to your lab, or how's that work?
We've had some great funding from NSF and from National Geographic Society to actually go on field expeditions to far-flung places and sample dogs that are there. And then we've also had great collaborators who, for other reasons are going out in the field, but, wherever you go in the field, if there's humans there, there's going to be dogs there. And so if you can hand them some cheek swabs, you can fill in the gaps for places that you just aren't able to get to yourself.
Talking to Anna Boyko from Cornell University, who studies dogs and the history of dogs, the DNA of dogs, and those kinds of things. And he's a guest of the biology department at the University of Louisville in the Arts and Sciences, the College of Arts and Sciences. When you are going around the world and you're looking at these different dogs, is there a dramatic difference in the genomes that you're finding in, and you can track in a dog in Russia versus the dogs you're going to find in Alaska or Maryland?
Right. So, yeah, some of these populations are very ancient populations. So if we're sampling from a remote village in Africa, that dog genetically is going to look very different than sampling in a remote village in India. If you're sampling in the Americas, those dogs almost exclusively descend from European dogs. So Native Americans had dogs in the Americas for 10,000 years, but the dogs that you see today running around the streets and villages of Central and South America are all descended from the colonist dogs and not the Native American dogs.
Right. And so when you find those, how do you know which one's the toughest? I mean, or which one is genetically got the makeup of being, at the top of the food chain in the dog world? Or can you tell us? Can you give us some idea?
I mean, it's definitely the case that the dogs become adapted to their local environments.
Right.
So if you look at dogs in Tibet, they have a mutation that lets them adjust to the high altitude, low oxygen environment that you see up there. In the same gene that humans in Tibet, like Sherpas, have a mutation. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of convergent evolution between dogs and people adapting to similar environments where they co-occur.
Well, you know what people are going to want to know as they listen to this is what's the background of my dog? Well, you can get a hold of Adam in here, and he can probably tell you through a DNA swab. But they'll also want to know, is my dog the smartest? Is my dog and my my little poodle over here is Misty over here the smartest dog on the planet, or is it my neighbor's dog, which is a German Shepherd? Can you get into that much? And
I don't want to pick favorites with dog breeds. We don't know.
I'm trying to pull you into this one. You realize
no,
that?
Yeah, we don't know the genes for most behaviors or for intelligence in dogs yet. There's definitely a lot of interest. There's people who pay a lot of money to breed dogs to perform certain roles where you need to have certain behaviors and intelligence. But that's another situation where you need genetic analysis and really good phenotypic analysis from a lot of dogs before you can identify those associated variants.
Big picture for those of us in the human race, why do you think this is important that we know the background, the history of dogs?
The history of dogs is the history of people. I mean, it was the first species that was domesticated by people. And so understanding how that process happened is going to tell us a lot. And it's not a jump to conclude that, because dogs predated agriculture and the domestication of all the other livestock, maybe they actually played a role in making it possible that we could go through this agricultural revolution. So a lot of it is understanding ourselves. And then, a lot of it is dogs are useful, they're functional, they're important members of the family. And we're still new at this animal breeding thing, and how can we get dogs that are actually healthy and happy and well adjusted to the roles that we want them to play.
Very good. Before I go, I guess I'll let you pitch your company. Give us the name of your company.
So the name of the company is Embark.
Embark. Get it? Everybody get that? Okay, yeah.
Embarkvet.com, EMBARK vet.com.
Okay.
And you can go there and you can learn all about DNA testing of your dog.
Very good. All right. Anna Boyko, appreciate you being in Louisville. Thanks for coming to the University
of
Louisville. All right.
All right.
Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.